FTL Faster Than Light is a favorite game of mine, and for good reason. It's an RPG with strong writing and world building, clever mechanics, and an overall fresh spin on the roguelike genre. Originally released for PCs in 2012, it's one of the best-known, best-loved roguelike games of all time. Its premise is pretty simple. There's a war going on in the galaxy between a Federation and some rebels. Your mission is to deliver crucial information to the Federation in order to end the war. This is easier said than done, as asteroid fields, space pirates, rebels, and self-appointed reality-warping prophets will stand in your way, all while you're being chased by the relentless rebel fleet. All you have is your ship, your crew, and your wits. To give a brief overview of the gameplay, the galaxy is littered with points for your ship to jump between. At these points, you'll find hazards and rewards. In order to advance between the game's levels, you need to reach the exit point at the end of each level. All the while, you're being chased by this rebel fleet, which slowly engulfs the map. Points that you have previously visited soon become unsafe to return to. So along the way, you can upgrade your ship using scrap, which is also used as a currency at shops to buy weapons, fuel, and crewmates. If you don't reach the exit beacon in time, you'll be caught by the rebel fleet and forced to fight a rebel ship that's a fair bit more powerful than most in the system. If your ship gets destroyed in this battle, you'll lose the game and have to start over. Besides being incredibly entertaining, FTL Faster Than Light is a game that other games can stand to learn from. In this episode, we'll be talking about how FTL manages to balance risk and reward, how it handles moral choice in ways that keep players guessing, and how it pulls off a lot of world building with a little canvas. Point 1. Well-balanced risk and reward. I'm fond of RPGs, but something that too often kills the fun of them, for me, is that there's often little risk involved. Consider the older Final Fantasy games. At first, they're pretty straightforward and exciting, because as you're playing the game, you're fighting monsters, leveling up, and saving your money for special items. After a while, however, you come to realize that you don't have to constantly spend money on fancy swords or armor, because you'll find most of what you need lying around, left inexplicably in unlocked chests around the world. There isn't a lot of risk involved in walking through a forest or cave and opening up a chest. Sure, there are the random monster encounters, but as the game rolls on, you're less and less likely to perish due to a random monster encounter. They just turn into an easy source of money and experience points, and by the game's end, you, the player, will have a bag full of unused potions and a wallet full of unspent gil. Then too, there are the boss battles that are all too often prefaced by the discovery of great loot in unlocked chests. Is there a good explanation in the worlds of these games why people leave perfectly good armor and shields and potions inside unlocked boxes? Besides being weird from the standpoint of lore, these free boxes full of money negate risk. There's nothing to worry about while you're playing, thus turning Final Fantasy into a bore. FTL takes another approach entirely. The way that travel works in the game is that you can pilot your ship between beacons, hence the game's title, as these allow for faster-than-light travel. Unless you manage to obtain information from pirates and attack drones' memory banks, or by other means, there's generally no telling what you'll find at each beacon, so you're getting random battles, rather like in Final Fantasy. What sets FTL apart is that it's entirely possible to die very early in the game, in spite of having made the decisions that seem right. This isn't in praise of arbitrary difficulty, or a game that's being unfair on purpose. Rather, the point is that there's an element of risk, hence, there's an element of dramatic tension, and no amount of player skill can completely mitigate it. On top of this, many of the game's events, and their outcomes, are randomized. You may find a single survivor of a cataclysmic event. You could choose to help him, but there's also the chance that he'll somehow betray you later on. what will you do? There could be reward if you choose to help this person, but there's risk as well. And this is where FTL gets much of its dramatic tension. There's constant pressure to keep moving forward because of the encroaching rebel fleet at your back. If you get caught by the fleet, you'll be matched against a foe that's significantly stronger than you are. Generally, you don't have to put yourself at the risk of being caught by the fleet. You can rush to the exit beacons, but in so doing, you'll miss out on potential loot in the sector. Still, if you spend too long in the sector, get caught, and destroyed, it'll all have been for nothing. Then again, if you get some epic loot, you could use it to beat the fleet once you're caught. Perhaps it will have been worthwhile. So what do other games stand to learn from FTL's balance of risk and reward? To start with, no resource should have an opportunity to sit stagnant. Those rewards that you're always running risks to obtain, you actually have to use them. Compare this to Final Fantasy. By the end of a Final Fantasy, there's a good chance that you'll have a ton of unused currency, 25 Phoenix Downs, and more potions than you can imagine using. What was the point of picking all this junk up later in the game besides watching numbers grow? Incredibly important to preventing this stagnation in FTL is the advancing rebel fleet. With every move, they're getting closer. There's a continual source of pressure on the player to spend resources one way or another. If you're designing a game, it's worth examining where that pressure is, so to speak. If players don't feel pressure to keep moving, if they're just floating through the game without improving, if they don't have a use for the resources that you're making them chase, they're going to get bored. Then too, other games shouldn't be afraid to make chasing rewards riskier. I honestly can't remember the last time a side quest in an RPG killed or even challenged me. At best, they've been extra bits of story to enjoy, but at worst, they've been meaningless distractions, filler, in exchange for in-game rewards. Why not make side quests a challenge? Why not make them more dangerous to the player's overall progress? That would make a lot more RPGs a lot more interesting. Point 2. Moral choice shouldn't always be obvious, or rewarding. Something I appreciate about FTL is that the game features moral choices, but no real morality system. You can play the game as kindly or as meanly as you want, and you're still a hero, if you win. You come across pirates attacking a civilian ship. They don't much like the look of your ship, and they offer you a bribe to look the other way. You could accept it, or you could fight the pirates. There's no guarantee that you'll survive the fight with the pirates, or that the loot that you'll get from beating them will be better than that you'd have gained if you just accepted the bribe. Maybe you'll play the game like me, a crusader of justice. I always fight the pirates, and sometimes it results in great rewards. I'll wind up getting scrap from destroying their ships, and the civilians will thank me for my help with material rewards. Other times, the civilians jump away, and the scrap from the pirates just isn't enough to cover the damage that they did to my ship. Now, this represents a clear-cut case of what the morally right thing to do is. But what about when it's unclear? Maybe a pirate is being pursued by an otherwise peaceful race, and he's now begging for your help. Do you offer your assistance, or do you offer him up to his captors? Perhaps you've encountered a poorly armed rebel ship sneaking away from a planet on some sort of supply run. You intercept it, fight it, and discover that it was carrying medicine for people who needed it. It's funny, really. Why the rebels are rebelling in FTL isn't totally clear, but it is made clear that the people on the other side of the conflict, troublesome as they are people. Your actions can hurt them. In the space of an interstellar conflict, it's up to the player to determine the bounds of their own morality. So does this make FTL anti-moral? No. The game doesn't intentionally reward negative behavior. Indeed, there are some rewards for doing good things. The thing is, the game rejects the sort of rigid morality systems that define other games. Consider BioShock.
Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow?
This sci-fi FPS granted players superpowers for fighting their way through a violent dystopia. These powers could be enhanced with a substance obtained from brainwashed, genetically modified orphans, little sisters. The thing is, the players would get more of the substance by killing the orphans. Players who chose not to kill orphans would receive less of the substance, but it leaned a gamified moral compass in their favor, resulting in their receiving help from a kind-hearted lady and, at the end of the game, a special cutscene. I am not here to bash BioShock, but I strongly prefer FTL's system of moral choice because it doesn't bash you over the head with what you should or shouldn't do. It's not kill orphans or spare orphans for clear benefits. It's a game that allows you to make decisions on a moral spectrum. Sometimes you do something good and you get punished for it, and that's alright. It makes the whole experience more believable and engrossing, and it really gets you into the spirit of role-playing, because the decisions you make aren't always about gaming a system for rewards, but defining your own story as you play the game, and that's beautiful. The lesson that other games can take away is that moral choice doesn't have to be obvious for players to appreciate its presence, and that doing the right thing can be its own reward for players and their own personal story within the game. You don't need to shine a light on which choices will have moral repercussions, and there shouldn't always be a right answer, but whatever players choose, there should be consequences. There should be unique challenges associated with whatever moral path a player chooses. If you're creating a game with moral choices for the player's consideration, think long and hard about how you present each choice. If, by your offered choices and consequences, you yell, "This idea is wrong," you're not going to make anybody think seriously about the morality of their actions. What you're going to do is bore people who share your viewpoint and alienate those who don't understand it. It's better to embrace nuance, make consequences meaningful, and ultimately, let the players decide who they are. Point number 3. Meaningful world building in a limited space. If there's one thing to love about FTL, it's the way the game has built its universe. That is, not a whole lot. FTL is a simple game in most aspects, and its story is no exception. That's not to say that no effort was put into the game's story. Quite the opposite, in fact. The developers resisted the temptation to succumb to what's known among writers as world builder's disease, an affliction that causes sci-fi and fantasy writers to spend all their time fleshing out a fictional world with lore. Said writers then fail to use said lore to tell interesting stories. In a 1953 letter to his agent, author Raymond Chandler put it best. "Did you ever read what they call science fiction? It's a scream. It's written like this. I checked out with K-19 on Aldebaran 3 and stepped out through the Chromolite hatch on my 22 model Cyrus hardtop. I cocked the time injector in secondary and waded through the bright blue Manda grass. My breath froze into pink pretzels. I flicked on the heat bars, and the brills ran swiftly on 5 legs, using their other 2 to send out Krylon vibrations." To be perfectly clear, there's nothing wrong with world building. It's an essential part of writing fictional worlds. Trouble is, it can be all too easy to spend all your time building a house and none of your time living in it. FTL deftly avoids this. It doesn't throw walls of text at you about the game's story, and it doesn't drag you through lengthy, expository conversations.
I'm coming up to the bridge.
While there are some bits of text explaining scenarios, such as the descriptions of sectors, they're not long and drawn out. FTL presents its world with action. Those slugs that inhabit the nebula? They're psychic, and they're immune to your mind control system. Incidentally, these slugs have a reputation for pulling all sorts of scams, and because they live in the nebula, your ship's sensors may not always have sight of the inside of their ship, thus furthering the slug subterfuge. This is a beautiful marriage of game mechanics and an internally consistent game story. Other games don't have to follow this style of storytelling or world building. What worked in FTL might not work for another RPG. That said, other RPGs could definitely be improved by taking a page out of FTL's book. Not everybody plays a game to read a novelette unless they're playing Sunless Sea. So why not let some pieces of world building speak for themselves through dialogue that doesn't feel heavily expository? Why not just let the world reveal itself through quests and game mechanics? If you don't believe that FTL's style of world building and storytelling is effective for pulling players into a universe, might I suggest checking out the game's community? It is still going strong some years after the game's release, and there's a sizable amount of fan-made content, stories, and artwork. Redditor Dirty Tabs is responsible for making a ton of great comics set in the FTL universe. And Adam Matlock has created this fantastic accordion cover of Civil from the FTL soundtrack. You can check out more of his music at anhistoricmusic.bandcamp.com. This has been Other Games Can Learn From. This is our pilot episode. What do you think of the show? Are we right about FTL and all that it stands to teach other games? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and let us know. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/1rbc. Thank you for watching, and be sure to keep learning. And now for a brief word from our sponsor, followed by some assorted thoughts on FTL. There are more tools to make games, and games being released, than ever before. How do you get your game noticed by sites, streamers, and other outlets? Playing the Press is your guide to standing up and standing out. 90% of dentists surveyed recommend your toothpaste. 100% of game devs surveyed recommend Playing the Press. Don't just take my word for it. Here's what the developers have to say.
Since I'm very new to the industry, it's a good primer for just getting a basic understanding of how to contact the press, how to speak to them.
Any advice from the book that you would definitely want to pass on to other devs?
No, not necessarily. Just read the book. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It gets right to the point.
Get it on Amazon and itch.io today. Part of what makes FTL work so well is its straightforwardness. Seriously, look at how clean the user interface is. It's not cluttered. The game's presentation is pretty minimal. Every visual element serves some purpose. I don't think other games need to employ this style, but maybe they could stand to learn from it, perhaps by eliminating visual clutter in order to prevent distraction. Sometimes I do wish FTL was a little less minimal. For instance, there aren't really cutscenes, and the quests and the stories aren't illustrated. Do you know how cool the Great Eye event would be if it were animated? The morality system in FTL seems to work so well because of the game's simple presentation. It feels as though some context is missing to the snippets of story that the game hands players. Perhaps if the story were busier and if individual quests were more fleshed out, the game would benefit from a few less choices to keep the story from getting distracting. After all, a moral choice that you make in FTL doesn't necessarily stick to you for the rest of the game. If you make a choice once without being fully informed of its potential consequences in a longer game, and then you're punished through the rest of the game because of that choice, that's less exciting and just a lot more punishing. Because of FTL's comparatively brief length, things with big consequences don't necessarily have to be things that drag on and on and on. The game's slavers create a really interesting moral dilemma. If you stumble across them, they'll probably fight you unless you offer up a crew member as a slave. Now, if your ship's not looking too good, it may be necessary to do this, but you could try and fight them. Now, what happens if you actually defeat the slave ship and blow it up? Well, that's less slavers traversing the galaxy, but that also ends the lives of the slaves on board. Then, too, if you bring the slave ship within an inch of destruction, the slavers on board may offer up a slave. If you accept said slave into your crew, does that make you part of the slave trade? That's for you to decide.